going into destruction.
That's so pleasant to start out in.
Okay. So, we're talking about, capturing guidance. Now we're going into destruction. Well, we're not going into destruction. I'm not trying to speak on anyone. But,
The topic of destruction.
the topic of destruction,
I
right?
got you.
Okay. Now, we talked about what happens when there's an absence of those things. So this is one thing that would this will slip up on you if you don't really think about it. I think this is the perfect time to for real think about this and address this. The enemy says that, the word says that the enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy. Right? Now, I think what happens is that people think kill and destroy are the same things.
Mm-hmm.
However, different words are being used. And I think about a lot of times in our, in our action movie driven kind of society, we think about destroy like, these big explosions or whatever
It's
it
like
is.
Die Hard or
Right.
Rambo or something.
You're thinking of, of Rambo, like blowing up a helicopter or something like that. Well, I do because I'm 37. But, you might think of the Expendables or just your favorite anime.
Yeah, for those young bucks.
Yes, for you kids out there with your skinny jeans and
I've got skinny jeans. Don't hate.
mumble rappings.
Mumble rappings.
Really? We're gonna do that in this podcast?
Broken focus.
So
Broken focus.
destroyed it. But I think that destruction is a tactic that he employs to tear down the barriers in order to get you to not focus. Because if I destroy the barriers, I destroy the guidance. If I destroy the guidance, then you're just kind of out there and I call it watering weeds. You're supposed to water a seed, not water the weeds. So when you water the weeds, what happens is that the weeds begin to grow up to the point where it's impossible for a seed or vision to grow anymore. So, but what do you guys think about when you think about destruction? I'll start with you, Shamara, since Zach is chewing ice.
So I'm just gonna move on. I'm in Amos chapter 5, verse 9. I'm gonna read two verses. I would do 9 and 10. And so this gave me different perspective on destruction. Amos 5, 9 and 10. So one of the minor prophets, as they call him, who makes destruction flash forth against the strong, so that destruction comes upon the fortress. They hate him who reproves in the gate. They abhor him who speaks the truth. Therefore, I'm going to do 3 verses. Verse 11, because you trample on the poor and you exact taxes of grain from him, you have built a house of hewn stone, but you shall not dwell in them. You have planted pleasant vineyards, but you shall not drink their wine. So initially, I was thinking about destruction as judgment, something that's just all bad. And I think certainly there's a piece to that.
Mm-hmm.
But at this point, I see destruction as pruning. So let me push that a little bit further and a little bit harder. I think, right, just like when we talked about capture, I think the question becomes not whether there is destruction, but who is doing the destroying. And so, so Christian pastor, right there, giveaway. So when God is doing the destroying, or even I'll put it in a very, very practical sense. When I was a kid and my parents destroyed something that I was working on, it was a pruning process to relieve me of some sort of distraction. Right. So in the text that I just read, starts off, verse 9, who makes destruction flash forth against the strong, so that destruction comes upon the fortress, right? Now, why would somebody do that? Because, verse 10, they hate him who reproves in the gate. They abhor him who speaks the truth. Therefore, verse 11, because you have trampled on the poor and you exact taxes of grain from him, you have built the house of hewn stone, but you won't be able to dwell in it, right? So this is a pruning process. God is pruning out or pulling up the weeds of the bad individuals who are abusing the vulnerable so that the vulnerable can prosper. Mm-hmm. Right? But so I'm going to take that on the other side, though, right? But the enemy can also prune.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So he can also take the very good plans that God has for your life and prune them back such that they don't grow straight. If you let them. Right. So I'm going to lean back on, I'm going to fall back on not whether destruction in and of itself is a good, but who is doing the destruction. That determines whether it is a good or a bad, right? So who you are listening to. So this takes us back to the initial topic that started this whole thing. Who has captured you and what have you captured?
And I think that's interesting you put it that way. Shamar's always really good at taking a very neutral, unbiased perspective on so many things.
Yeah.
No, but that's cool because, you know, you could even look at a situation like in your life that's very like stressful or sorrowful or whatever. Yes. And, you know, that could either be from God if you take that perspective that he's capturing that situation, yes, or even in Satan's sense that he had captured that situation and then had inflicted destruction or what have you.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
But so I do that because I was reading an article just this week. It was about a Christian artist, a musical artist, a different country, not American, who made the decision to walk away from Christianity.
I read that article.
Because he read some passages in the Bible where God declared destruction on a particular nation.
Yes, he wasn't progressive enough. That's usually why people. But that's what happens. People back away from the faith because he's not progressive enough. So I'm just like,
right. And so his question was, how can God be so mean effectively? Right? How can God, who claims to be peaceful and loving, pronounce this judgment? So I'm going to put that in a slightly different context. Right? Let us pretend that Hitler was a bad guy.
Okay.
For the sake of discussion. If God pronounced judgment on Hitler and his armies, right, who were doing bad things, I would not be mad at God and consider him to be mean for destroying the destroyer.
Correct.
Right.
And so when I read those passages in the Bible, I'm very careful to look at who he's destroying and why he's pronouncing destruction, not just isolating the word destruction itself and then pivoting off of that.
Gotcha. So
my focus is first meaning and then context.
Yeah.
Right? What does this word mean? And then in what context is it being applied? Because I think that if you don't get the meaning and the context, you are easily led astray. So how many people have we heard of who have walked away from the faith because they took a word, applied the inappropriate meaning and the wrong context, and then blamed God for things that he did not do?
Correct.
Yeah. And we're still saying that Hitler was a bad guy.
We're on that.
Yeah.
We are for the Jews.
Yeah, we had a Jewish Messiah. So just throw that out there, you know.
That's so cool. It's funny, like, Justin brought up destruction just when he first got started, and immediately I tried to, like, dissect, you know, even on a very literal sense, what destruction means. So, like, even if you break the word down, you know, in my mind, I took destruction as, like, you know, root word being structure, whether this is actually correct or not, and to destructure.
Yes.
That's how I understood it. I think that's probably
brilliant,
correct.
though. Yeah.
Right. So I think even if once it's described in Scripture, if Satan comes to destroy and to inflict destruction, one of his main games is to, you know, destructure something that's good or wholesome, or your
Mm-hmm.
routine, or your focus. Like, if your focus is broken, if there's no structure there, you can't move forward.
Man, that's brilliant.
If your relationship with God has no structure, that gives room for all this broken focus and everything else.
Good heavens.
Even in church, like, if there's no structure in the church, if it's destroyed. That is destruction.
Right. The structure.
It is void of structure. That's the way I understand it.
Right, because I think in Latin means not.
Yeah, not structure.
Not structure.
Right.
And so what's interesting is one of the things that he said in the article is that there's a name for the process that he went through of walking away from God, and it is called deconstruction.
Okay.
Obviously, structure and discipline are very important.
It's almost like that's the first thing he taught us once again.
Wow.
It's almost as if he knew what he was doing, But I just want to say that I really think that it was really important to talk about, what people would consider to be the mean parts of the Old Testament. It's like, because essentially, from what you've taught me, is that the Bible is kind of written in shorthand. It doesn't include the oral traditions that go along with the full context of the time.
That's correct.
So it's kind of like, if I were a rapper and I made a reference to a 90s commercial, but you weren't alive in the 90s, you're not going to get that reference. You're not going to get that Sprite reference, from the 90s if you weren't born in the 90s,
Right.
So when you go back and listen to that, it's like, now what is he talking about?
Right.
This doesn't make any sense to me.
Right.
So, like, them doing a bunch of things like child sacrifice and all kinds of crazy stuff that was hurting and harming innocent people, including children and women, and all kinds of ritualistic sacrifices and things like that, or just like the way that they lived. I remember watching a movie called At the End of the Spear, and talked about these people that were in the Brazilian jungles, and they had never had contact with civilized man, which is just another way of seeing white people. And
I mean, not really, but yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome, Zach. Zach's the only white guy here.
Ladies and gentlemen, I promise. Some of this is satire.
You're welcome. Anyway, but they had never seen been outside of the structure of what's modern society was doing. So I'm being facetious when I say that. So but
They've only ever seen the jungle. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. So, but their practices were things like, if someone was about to die, or they had been injured during a fight, because they were very, very violent people, so they were constantly at war, constantly. So if someone got stabbed with a spear and they were about to die, they would come to bury themselves, and then they request their wives would actually go ahead and bring over their children to die with them and be buried alive with their children.
Whoa.
Yeah. So, that's what was. Now that's a capture and the guidance right there that you don't want to be part of right there. So, right?
Church say amen.
Right. So there's all these kinds of things out there that people think that God's being mean against. It's kind of like, no, he probably should destroy that structure. There should be some deconstruction of whatever the heck that is.
Right. Well, that's back to what Shamar was saying. I think of it just in a pruning sense.
Yeah.
If he's destroyed that city, it's a pruning process.
Yeah. Because we don't have the full context, or I shouldn't say that. Most people don't investigate the full context of that society that he's saying to go ahead and wipe this whole thing out.
Mm-hmm.
They don't investigate that. It just sounds bad. So they look innocent, even though the context is in an oral tradition about what was actually going on with that society at that point in time. And furthermore, most of the time they would be fleeing to the point where no one would be executed the way that God was. Basically, like, the complete and total annihilation of something would never happen the way that God was saying for it to happen. They would flee most of the times, and it's never happen. So that's another contextual thing right there too. So again, Well, this goes back into capturing every argument.
Yes.
So we just
Yep.
deconstructed, we destroyed every argument
Yep.
that puts itself higher above the word or knowledge of God.
That's right. That's right. Yep. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion. I love that. Lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ.
Yep. There we go. There we go. Okay. We're ready to move on to this one's interesting. Earnings.